Call this meeting to order. My new gavel. I need a roll call vote for the Board of Aldermen, please.
Denham. Here. Skanes.
Here.
Cooper. Milton.
Here.
Fenton.
Here.
Whitus. C. Mayor, no quorum present.
Thank you. About a Finance Committee roll call, please.
Fenton.
Sorry. Here.
Okay. Whitus. Buckley.
Here.
Pinkley.
Here.
Yancey. Here. Romine.
Here.
Denham. Here. Milton.
Here.
Dobbins.
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. So on the agenda, we need an approval of the minutes of the Finance Committee for the May 27th, 2021 regular meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Then we'll go into the presentation of the regular reports, and that will be Jamie.
Yes. Tracy, can you pull up the sales tax, please? Sales tax reports. I'll go over them right now. We have, we're staff in training, so it's going to take just a few minutes. So the sales tax report for 10-year history, so I'm going to go over that. So we're in June's receipts. So for sales tax, June's receipts would be April's activity. You have 1.2 million and change for June, which is 149.6% above the prior year. Keeping in mind the prior year was the COVID year. And then year to date, we're at 5.5 million or 20.3% above the previous year.
I'd like to comment on that. I know we're these percentages are to prior year, which was our COVID year. But if we look back at the year-to-date of the monthly $1.2 million, in 19, we had 896,000. 18 was 835. So the $1.2 million is, we are clearly on pace for a record year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A couple of things that you need to understand on that as well. Keep in mind that's April activity, so we've got the largest and busiest part of our season ahead of us. The other thing, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, I'm just giving you facts to understand. So the one thing that we have been looking at in our office, and John as well, is what did the COVID year do to us, and what is our gap? What is our gap analysis that we have to make up in order to really make this a rock year, okay? So say that we are up 1% or 2%. Over the previous year, we were down 14.7, right? So even if we take 2019 into consideration, we were up 1.2%. So what we're doing is we're taking May activities, a 12-month period through April, okay? So we compared May 2020 through April of 2021, and we're calling that the COVID year because that was March activity through February of 2021. So that's our bulk of our COVID year. So I usually put it in quotes because that's what I call our COVID year. So then what we did is we went back and we analyzed 2019, the same time period, 2018, the same time period, 17 and 16. And we took an average of 16, 17, and 18's revenue through those periods. And then we compared it to the COVID year to see what we had to make up this year and going forward to catch up and really be on pace for getting ahead. Does that make sense so far? And so The gap analysis, I think we're still down 16%, and we still have a little ways to go. Overall funds, the gap is what we need to make up is a little more than $7 million, and then we've broken that down by fund. So just so you're aware, yes, this 149% looks awesome, and we were ever so thankful for it, but if you remember when we did the COVID financials last year, we said for about every month we're down, it's gonna take around 5 months to catch up. That's a pretty accurate, and we were assuming maybe 2023 we would be back on track. But the better we do this year, the closer we get to closing that gap and being ahead of our projections. I just want to lay that out because the numbers, they don't lie, and that's a good analysis as far as 5.5 million for the year. We have 5.2 in 2019, and so on and so forth. However, just keep in mind all of those things about the gap that we have to close in order to really branch up and get ahead. So that is just a pretty brief explanation of some of the things that we're doing to maybe stay on track and keep up with us. Thank you.
Okay, so I understand what you said, and I appreciate that. I guess let me just point out the year-to-date. I know we have catching up to do because of COVID. When I read across the last 10 years, it appears that year-to-date through April's activity, we are at 5.5 million. And when you read across, 2019 was our record year-to-date, which was 5.2 million, right? And then there was only one other year, 18, where it was at 5 million. So I'm just commenting that over the past, well, I'm going to say, this says over the past 10 years, but I think it would be safe to say that in the history of us tracking these numbers, we are up over this, we're on a record pace. I know we have catching up to do, but these are great numbers, aren't they?
They are good numbers. They are good numbers, and just keep in mind it's through April. So yes, they are good numbers. We need to hold and maintain this upward pace for the entire rest of the year, and we'll close in on that gap.
Thank you.
Mayor, question. Are those true and accurate numbers as far as, did you have any laggards still that hadn't paid? The obvious issues that we've had with the Department of Revenue in reporting. I want to go to the heart of that.
That is very accurate. So these are the receipts that we receive from the Department of Revenue, and we always have discussions with the Department of Revenue. In fact, I'm on a pretty much first-name basis with the Assistant Director of the Department of Revenue just because we have to go to them so frequently. So to say that this is extremely accurate numbers, I would say that every month we get late filings due to businesses filing late, due to the deadline in the closing period. It's a hard, fast closing period for DOR, so anything that comes in after that is rolled to the next month. Those kind of things we have issues for, and then we always have issues with things missing on our report and those kind of things that we do find and we address. So for this report's purposes, these are accurate recordings with what DOR is reporting to us at this point in time.
Okay, so there's no discrepancy between you all and Department of Revenue now of what you show versus what
If there is a small, not going to change that number very much. I would report to you if it was significant, as we have done many, many times, but we're looking at, I just reached out to him this morning, looking at possibility of, because if you know the businesses, they can file monthly, they can file quarterly, they can file annually. So one of the things we reached out to them this morning to try to keep on pace and maybe dive a little bit deeper down is to say, can you give us a list of all the businesses in our city and what their filing is. Is it annually? Is it quarterly? And that way we can dial in on that number a little bit closer. That's our intent. He did already respond, and he said he doesn't know if they can do that, but he will certainly look into it. So that's where we're at with that.
And Jamie, I'm on with our state treasurer, Scott Fitzpatrick. I'm on a first-name basis with him, so if I can help going to the top and work on our way back down, I'd be more than happy to.
Thank you.
You
I
may
appreciate-
scare him off.
Actually, he's a nice guy.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, we'll move forward with the transportation tax. And this is a half cent, and so this pretty much mirrors, if you look at the percentages, mirrors the 1% and the public safety tax. We are up by month, we are at $608,552, which is 155% over the previous year. And for the year to date, it's 2.7 million, which is a 20.6% increase over the previous year. And then, is there any questions on the transportation tax? If not, I will keep moving. The public safety sales tax history, again, is 156%, which is 608,000, 156% over the previous year, and 2.7 million, which is 20.8% over the previous year. Yes, sir.
Just compare transportation versus public safety again.
It's very close.
608 versus,
608, it's about
tracking right.
100, yes. We've really closed in that gap. If you remember when they first filed, it was a little bit bigger, and then throughout the years, we've really closed in on that gap. So I think the businesses are doing a pretty good job of filing there. Okay. We will move on to the tourism tax. So we're looking at May's receipts for, again, April activity. You're at $1.1 million. A little more than that, almost 1.2, which is a 702% increase. Keep in mind that we were 33.4% down last year, so you're going to expect a much larger increase on that. And then for year to date, we were at 4.3 million, or 102% over the previous year.
Let's hold there for a minute and just look back over the last 10 years.
that's significant.
That is a significant number. Is there anything that's askew with that 4.3 compared to the 2019 of 3.3?
You know, no, not that I'm aware of. Honestly, we had a great spring break, and a lot of that was tourism-driven activities, and so you are going to see that through April. As we get closer to the summer, I believe you'll probably see that level out a bit. However, these are numbers, good numbers for April, especially coming off of a pandemic year, but we do have quite a bit of gap to make up, so we just got to keep that in mind. And then the next report is the tourism tax receipts breakdown by classification. And I know we explain this every month, but I'll go ahead, and these are the major classifications for the tourism tax. And we also changed this up just a slight because of the pandemic year. We also added 2019 for your comparison, and you can see that your talking points just a few minutes ago, we are well above 2019 as well in most categories.
Let me study something real quick.
Sure.
Back up.
One thing I noticed is the theaters compared to 19 are still down roughly 10%.
The nightly rentals, I need to look at that number one more time, same month, 2,104%.
That's month over month. Year to date is up. If you scroll up, there you go.
Yeah, I've seen I'm looking at the 55,000 number versus 128,000.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any more questions on those? Please stop me again if you have questions. We've got a full agenda today, so I'm trying to meet the timeline, so real quick. Okay, so this is the rolling 12 report, and this, as you recall, we talk about this every month, but this, when we get the taxes, we put them back into the actual filing period so that you can see, and so March is the most recent and most accurate that we will have. So this kind of gives you a picture. We are 92.5% greater than the previous year. And then the next rolling 12 gives you a look at the retail sales by area for the entire city. And I like this report. This shows you really month over month, year over year, the retail sales. This shows you the growth. If you look at the growth, we're about still 11% down if you look at the growth for a 12-month rolling period, which is what I just talked about. So if you look at that, there's where we're at. And keep in mind, when we get those Department of Revenue reports, they send us a report, and they send us every business, and it shows us what month they're filing for. So we have to, for this report, we go back in, and it will always change because we have to go back in and put it back in the month of the activity. So this report we always like to show you because those other reports are based upon when we receive the money. These reports are based upon when the activity is and when the businesses file. You might have a business file 6 months at a time and late, and so we have to go back in every month and put those back into the proper accounting periods and the activity. So this is a really good picture of the overall retail sales for the city and the categories. So it's a really good look. Overall picture.
Does this report indicate anything in the TIF district where Walmart, Home Depot, Target?
Branson Landing, Branson Hills would be that TIF district. So if you look at the Branson Hills, Tracy, can you scroll down so we can see the bottom? I'm sorry, up, yeah. I keep scrolling on my screen, that's silly. We're 4% up, 4.7% in the Branson Hills, up. And one thing I will note, and when we looked at it as far as the economic impact over the pandemic year, and even in the country, most of you are all aware of this, but the retail stores, the big box stores, and those kind of things, they did all right during that period. So that was a good thing for us, and so it's a good thing across our country. So if you can look at that and you can put those into the categories of where they were, visualize it, you can see really where we did great and what we have to catch up on. And again, we're 11% down as far as economic.
Let me make this comment before somebody else does in the public. I agree with everything you just said from a financial aspect, but it needs to be noted that when the city, when we shut down, except for our, what were those businesses? Essential businesses. So the big box stores were still open, right? But it was at the expense of our smaller local businesses.
Okay.
Just, that question's gonna come out.
Okay. If there's no other questions on that, we'll move forward to the city sales tax, the not restricted for TIF payments. And just a little bit of history here. We created this report years ago to show how the rest of the city's doing and what we're up against outside of those TIF districts to kind of give you a gauge at where we're at. So if you look at this report, it tells you that the total sales tax receipts, $1.2 million on a monthly basis. Year to date, $5.5 million. Minus your TIF, which is $261,000 for the month or $1.2 million for the year. Then you have what's remaining. What's remaining for the year is almost $4.3 million, which is a $676,000 increase over the previous year. And that's for your 1% sales tax. Is there any questions on that? And then I'll go to.
It's greater than 19, that's what I was.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a good comparison, and we give 10 years of activity here so that you can gauge those. Okay, we'll keep moving. Thank you. This one is for the tourism tax. So the previous one was sales tax. This is tourism tax. And as you can see, I'll just drop right down to year to date. We're at 4.3 million, 3.8 million outside of the TIF districts, and a $1.7 million increase. And if you look at the 3.8, to your point, all the way across, we're still ahead, okay? Okay, we'll keep moving. And this is your monthly budget report. Just to do a brief explanation on this, I know I talk about this all the time, but I'm going to still define it for you all. What we do is we take the amount of money that we budgeted for this revenue, And because we are a highly tourism-driven city, it doesn't make sense for us to just do it on a straight line 12-month to show you where we're at in comparison to budget on a month-to-month. So what we did was we took 5 years of activity to show you, extrapolated that, did a percentage on a monthly basis to show you where our revenue should fall in that given month, give you a gauge to look at and where we're at right now. And so if you look at that on a year-to-date, we did assume 9.5 million for this sales tax. I do believe we're going to exceed that, so yay. But on a monthly basis, on an annual budget, 2021, we're at 1.2 million, and then we're 77.7% above where we assumed that we would be, given the numbers and the historical figures. So year-to-date actual, that was on a monthly basis. Year-to-date actual, we're at 5.5 million, which is a 32% increase over year-to-date. So for budget purposes, we are still trailing well ahead. Okay?
So, Jamie, just one quick question. I know when we're comparing these, under the bolded column of the 2021 budget, do you recall when that was prepared, that budget? I mean, what part of the pandemic were we in?
Yes, so we prepare those numbers in August. After the end of July, we start preparing those numbers in August. The idea behind that was, you know, how when we had to reduce the revenue assumptions for the COVID financials,
Sure.
What we wanted to do is we did not think that we were going to still be down as far, but it was a pretty big challenge to assume what was coming because this was a unknown for the entire world. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to show some improvement based upon, we did that 5 months, remember, we canceled out 5 months worth of revenue to see if our city could survive, and we did, thank the good Lord. So that's kind of where we took it from, and we stair-stepped those revenues up, going back, and I think 2023, we assumed we would be back at 2019 numbers, so that's where those numbers came from. And we did that roughly around in August, and then we had those special budget meetings at the end of September and October, and then it was passed in November.
Do you, and I know we have our 2021 budget. Are you anticipating revising those numbers next month? Is it
Certainly,
July?
yes. And in fact, July is that month for us. We were getting finished with the audit, getting finished with some of our big rocks for the half of the year, and we're going in, and we hope to have that done by the end of July and be presented to you all so that you all can see where we're at in comparison, and do we have any money to free up, and we'll definitely have to take that gap that I talked about earlier
Sure.
into consideration when we make those decisions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The next one is the tourism tax receipts budget. It's we defined it based upon the same process that we did for the sales tax. So if you can see, we'll just skip right over to year to date, 4.3 million. So we're 134% above historical assumption for where we should be at this point in time in our budget. So you have a budget of 7.3 million, and at this point in time for the annual budget, we assumed, I believe, I'm looking at this right, 387,000. So there you go. We did budget conservatively again, but it's better to budget conservative. This is my opinion, so I'm going to share it. It's better to budget conservatively and come out ahead than it is to get right down so tightly that you have to adjust numbers and go backwards. So that is my opinion and my viewpoint on that. Okay, is there any questions on that?
No, it's just an observation. Those last 2 months are higher than any year, going all the way back to 2016.
Yeah, I would.
That my eyes could focus on going across that.
We did have and I think everybody in this town will tell you, spring break was a pretty awesome spring break this year.
Thank you.
I always go back to that gap, though, so remember, we needed these big numbers now to help close us in on where we need to be. So if there's no more questions on the sales tax, I'll just move right into the financial reports. And I'll start with the general fund. So total revenues there are 7.9 million versus 8.9 in the previous year and 9.5. And if you look at that, we have your license and permit fees are up, your court fees are pretty stable, your leases and rents are still trending up, your charges for services and your interest income is not up to last year, but it's well up to where we had projected it. So 7.9 million versus 8.9 from last year. And what I want to say about that is if you look at your taxes and franchise fees, you notice that it's still down. And if you're putting that together thinking, hey, your taxes are up, why is that number down? That is a deferred property tax revenue, okay? So essentially, without getting into a whole long line of detail, October through December, the previous year of property tax does not get released until the following year. So we have to put it into what we call a deferred revenue. So that's about $1.4 million, and you add that on and you'll see we're trending up about 200,000, okay?
Jamie, on this, in the general fund, and it must be somewhere else, but I know what we learned with the loan from the tourism tax to the general fund for the statues. Are those payments paid? I thought those payments were paid from the general fund back to
They are.
the tourism tax.
Yes, because the tourism tax originally paid for that. And so we do that once a year.
So where would that be reflected in our statement?
It's on the balance sheet because it's thank you, Stacy. She's wording it too. It's on the balance sheet because it's an interfund loan, so you won't see it here because remember that expense was taken out back when we purchased that, so it is on the balance sheet. So if you want to move to the balance sheet, or you want to wait until I get there and I'll show it to you?
We'll wait.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so the expenditures are 3.3 million versus 3.2 for last year. And then if there's any questions, you can go down and see the comparison. Typically, if you're really wanting to get into it, we always look at year over year, just really because this budget column would assume a straight line, and obviously that's why we do those other budget reports, so you can see reality as far as the tourism-driven city. These are the other financing sources down here. You have 4.1 million versus 4.4. Some of the variances there, the convention center, we've paid out 316 versus 260 last year. And so you can see some of those variances there. It's not a huge change. So the unreserved fund balance for the general fund is 6.9 million.
Jamie, on those fund balance and the unreserved fund balance, those 6 million, are those cash figures? Does that represent cash, or is that cash and assets?
Well, so for governmental funds, we don't record the capital assets. It's one of the differences between government and proprietary. So governmental funds is the only unrestricted, and so you can go and see there. Now, there will be some receivables and items in there, so you can see from the general fund, the cash and investments and the receivables and all of that, the total assets there on the balance sheet. So you'll be able to see the breakdown of what that fund balance is.
Okay, so that fund balance is...
You actually have cash and investments of 7.3, and you have receivables of 247, taxes, accruals 1.8, and so it takes a lot into account. Your assets minus your liabilities also equal your fund balance. So you also have about 2.8 million of liabilities. So you have to come down, consider both of those, and then the rest of it will be cash. And you can draw a line from your cash by fund report to see what actually is in the cash. Let me do that for you really quickly. General fund has about $7.3 million of cash and investments.
So in that reconciliation you do, that's kind of a good place to go.
Yes,
Right quick.
absolutely, yeah.
But this figure here is a combination of cash and...
Yes, sir.
Asset, yeah.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
Actually, you have more cash and investments, but you have liabilities and those things to consider.
Jamie, I'm gonna boil down something. Happy face, unhappy face. Are you happy face with where we are right now versus what you budgeted?
Yes, absolutely. I would say anybody that has this picture right now, given April's activities, so I don't want to be cup half empty kind of gal, kind of am, but what I will say is we have the bulk of our year ahead of us. And so we just really want to keep that in mind. We have a great start to the year. We have a big gap to make up. So the reality and the realistic picture is the bulk of our season is still ahead of us, and we hope for the trends to stay up. And that's really, I would say, I would have a happy face. I still have a smile on my face given everything. Yes, sir.
That's a conservative happy face,
It
right?
is,
Okay.
yes.
Wanted to
Because
know.
we have to consider long and big picture, not just one point in time. So yes, sir. Okay, we'll keep moving really quickly. So this is the public safety fund summary. If you also noticed, this is the public safety joined together when we say the summary. We also gave you a breakdown of the police fund versus the fire fund. Those two funds roll up into that fund summary just for your benefit. And so what we'll do is we'll go over the fund summary really quickly. You had 2.1 million in revenues and,
Excuse me a minute, we have
just picked up
Alderman showing up for his 10:35 meeting today.
we might need to get another chair, Stace. You're all right.
Might just take this time to remind the board and committee members to speak into the microphone as best you can. It's tough to pick up everything on the YouTube stream if you're not pretty close to it, so just as a reminder. Appreciate that.
Get my stuff out of the way.
So Alderman Cooper showed up. Could we start at the beginning?
Well, that depends on how much you want to get done today.
Just kidding.
Okay. So we are on the Public Safety Fund summary, and I just got finished explaining that we also gave you a breakdown between police and fire so that you could see the police fund summary rolls up those two accounts. It's one special revenue fund, but we also track it internally separately, so there is a picture for you all. And we'll talk about the police fund in more depth on the another item on the agenda. So if there's any questions right now, I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will keep moving. Yes, sir.
Jamie, I think I've admitted before, I'm not a financial expert, but could you help me understand why the 2021 budgeted revenues was 4.9 million, total expenditures is 11.287 million. So how do we make up that difference? Because that seems like our expenditures are projecting to go a lot more than our budgeted revenues. So where does that come from?
Well, your transfer ends are down on the other financing sources. It's an accurate picture what you're painting. Yes, the expenditures are greater than the revenues. The subsidies from the general fund are in the other financing sources. And you'll look down at the bottom and you'll see the 5.7 million in the budget column there. That is to offset some of the 11 million expenditures along with some of the other transfer ends.
So now I'm sorry to cut you off.
That's okay.
But in other words, we're pulling money out of the general fund to make up that difference.
Absolutely, and we reduced the subsidy as a COVID 25%, but the typical subsidy on that is 7.6 million, along with the other subsidy for the code enforcement piece that goes in there from the general fund as well. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will move on to the convention center. And I know that you're going to hear a presentation from Sam, the convention center, in just a few minutes, but I'll just highlight for the governmental perspective. Total revenues are at 1.1 million versus 978 million from last year. And total expenditures are at 1.5 million versus 1.4 from last year at this time, and 2.1 for 2019 as well. You can always look at 2019 to get a more accurate picture of a normal operating year. And so if you'll scroll down the other financing sources, you can see that these are monies that come in from the general fund and in from the tourism to offset some of the losses for the convention center. And so your transfer in was $316,000 from general fund and $477 from the tourism marketing funds. Total unreserved fund balance is $258,841 for the convention center. Is there any questions on that? Okay, we'll go on to the tourism tax. The tourism tax is 4.5 million revenues, 2.1 million from last year and 3.3 the year before. That 201, that intergovernmental amount that you see, that's 201,560. That's a reimbursement from the sewer sales tax for some of the projects out of the, I believe it was the wastewater treatment plant design project. That's a reimbursement from them.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Tracy, do we need to make a note that with Alderman Cooper here, the Board of Aldermen now has a quorum?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on, expenditures are 2 million versus 2.2 last year and 5 million the year before. And just a note for 2019, I always point you back to that, but we did pay off a debt issue in 2019. So if you look at the debt service across the board, you see 3.3 million in 2019 versus 1.8 in 2020. That's because we did pay off a debt issue there. And then if you'll scroll down, I keep thinking it's a touch screen. Other financing sources, if you look at that, we're about 867,590 versus 481,028 from 2020 and 640,373 from 2019.
Excuse me, Jamie, what
Yes.
funds did we use to pay off that bond?
Tourism tax.
So from the tourism tax?
It was a tourism revenue bond. So if you remember, I think we have one bond issue left, and that's supposed to get paid off the first of this next year.
Thank you.
Okay? Transportation Sales Tax Fund. This is your total revenues of 2.3 million versus 2.1, a little more than 2.1, and 2.2 for 2019. And then if you look at your expenditures for the transportation tax, you're at a little more than 1 million for expenditures, 983 for 2020, and 1.1 million for 2019. You can see the breakdown there. And then you have your other financing sources, and those are your transfer in and outs to debt. And that the water sewer one, the transfer in from water sewer, that is when like a water line breaks or something like that and the road gets torn up and has to get replaced. Water sewer transfers money into the transportation to cover the costs of some of that. Okay, that's what that line item is. And then your unreserved fund balance is 3.6 million. Okay, we'll keep moving. I'm sorry, I'm taking a lot of time. Okay. The next one is your combining TIF debt structure. So this is your combining TIFs for all the TIFs that we have. This is the revenue coming in, and you'll see the expenditures going out. And then you'll see the debt services as well as this point in time. And then your other financing sources, and this really will show you where all the money comes into this, these debt funds to help pay off that bond, those bonds that we still have remaining for the TIF districts. Okay. And then this one is this is one bond issue. We used to call it the Branson Meadows debt. Obviously, Branson Meadows TIF is done, but we still have a debt issue against that. And it's pretty much the same. We just track it separately.
Jamie, how much
yes.
longer is that going to continue to?
The 2011, I believe, goes to 31. However, we just had a call yesterday with some investors and our financial advisors, and there's a possibility because it matures at the end of this year, there's a possibility for maybe some private refinancing to chop some time off of that and a couple $1 million. So we're looking into that to see if we can do that.
Thank you.
Jamie, which one of these funds, and I believe it's one of these funds, that we have a 10% interest rate?
Which debt issue?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. I don't know that off of the top of my head. I
Okay.
am sorry. I will get that for you, though.
But we have one
It's
at
pretty
10.
high, yes.
Yeah, and we're looking for ways to refinance that.
Yes, we always are. Public financing is a bit difficult now due to the S&P report, and we have to wait until we have another credit rating to get that up a little bit. But we do have some opportunity with private because of the structure and the interest rates as of right now. So we're keeping our eye on that, looking at the private ramifications there, and that goes along with this debt. So if we can save years off of our debt and save dollars, we typically have a benchmark of savings of 3%, and then we always go after some years. So we look at that almost on a monthly basis to see what we're up against and when and if and where we can get it done. A lot of the larger debt will be public bonding, and that'll probably be mid to next year after we do an S&P credit rating if possible.
I'm going to ask a question, and I don't expect the answer right now, because I know there's a bigger picture involved. But on a bond that is at 10%, have we explored, and I know this is going to sound too simple, but like a local bank to refinance that dollar amount into a much lower interest rate?
And that would be more of the private loans, what I just talked about. However, some of the debt that 10% on is a very large debt issue. So you would probably be better off doing it in the municipal bond market and getting a better rate structure than a local bank. However, before we do that, we always put out a request and branch it out. And we don't just keep it local, we spread it out, because we've had some pretty good success with some municipal bonding agencies up there in the east. So whatever we can get, we always do a request out there to see what the interest is on refinancing our bonds or our debt, stuff like that.
Thank you.
Okay, there's not much going on in the capital projects fund, so we will keep that moving. Perpetual fund either. Parks and Rec is the next larger one that I will tell you that there's $718,000 so far in revenue versus last year of $327,000, and 2019 $610,000. And we talked about this the other night, but the campground is doing, if you look across the campground line items, they're doing pretty well as far as revenue goes. Also, I believe the ball programs are doing well. There's many of her line items that are just really, I would say, knocking it out of the park. No pun intended, but there you go.
That's good.
Is that a conservative statement?
See, finance people can be kind of funny too. Okay, expenditures, $879,000 versus $722 last year, and $872 the year before. So we're keeping our expenditures pretty consistent, and our revenues are growing. And if you look at the other financing sources, that $750,000 budget, which is your $312,500, that's the subsidy that the general fund pays. And I will tell you that this is the subsidy. We also reduced that one by 25% for the COVID year and this year budget as well. So that's where that one come from as well. And their unreserved fund balance is a little more than $1 million. So, is there any questions on that one?
Did you expect that number, the $1 million number?
Actually, I don't think I expected it. I'll be just really honest. I don't think I expected it, but we're very thankful for that, because what we typically do is once the audit's presented before you all, then we look at some of those balances. And so for the parks, what we do every year is we look at, okay, where does the code say they need to keep their reserve? For the parks, the code says they need to keep it at a 10% of operating expenditures. We also have to look long-term, because if you keep it right at 10%, then the next year is very difficult to keep up to 10%. So we have to keep a little bit of cushion to balance that out. However, we'll be bringing before you all probably in the next month about a $400,000 budget transfer to move about $400,000 from the parks to her internal service fund. And what that'll do is that'll help her really build up that internal service fund and be able to do her replacement schedule and budget that for the next year, so she has some funds, so you don't always have to see all these budget amendments coming forward for all these things. She will really have a good handle on that internal service fund. So we just transfer it out of here into her internal service fund, and it really helps build up her replacement and repair schedules.
Just a note, the information I received on the Parks Department, to repeat myself, I'm really anxious and focused on providing more funds for our neighborhood parks. And so I'm looking for, I believe it's $1 million to $1.5 million. Boy, that'll raise your eyebrows.
Yes, it did.
However,
I thought my glasses would cover that.
However, I'll still say that that's important to our community, and I'm going to keep trying to make that happen.
So the
Stan.
opportunity is we'll look at that during the budgeting and priority.
Yes,
Figure out.
absolutely, yes. Of which we'll talk about that schedule towards the end of this, because that schedule's already laid out, so. And then we'll move on. This is just a picture of all those governmental funds we've already talked about. We summarize those to all governmental funds. The next one is the water sewer fund. Remember, this is a business type activity, so we call those a proprietary fund. Consumption is up, which is great, which means your charges for services for water and sewer will be up. Your interest income, you can see that we've already exceeded what we anticipated with our budget, and we are conservative, but that's, I mean, it was a good thing. And so intergovernmental as well. 2020, if you look at the intergovernmental, you'll see 242,000 versus this year you see 13,742. That 242,000, a bulk of that was FEMA monies that we received in from the 2017 flood. Okay, so if you extrapolate that, it's pretty much level. Okay. So,
Jamie,
yes, sir?
Are you having to, or are we having to, because we are seeing a little bit of increase, to put money back into reserve that we might or might not have touched during 2020? Or we did not go into any of the reserve on any of these funds?
Let me see if I understand your question. Are you saying, are we just taking money and building up our reserve? Is that what you're asking?
first
Because we
que-
dipped into it last year?
Yeah. Are we having to set aside money to drop back into reserve because of shortfalls of 2020?
Well, I would say the answer would be no, because when we did the COVID financials, I believe the only fund that dropped below the 20% reserve was the water sewer, and I believe with this year's budget, we balanced that, so this year's budget took care of any of that. So if we maintain on track with budget for this year, or do better, I don't think we'll have to do any of that, but if we were to do that, it would be coming at the end of the year when we have a better picture of how the year will play out. Any more questions on that? Okay. The next ones are the capital funds for the water sewer, and we do keep those separate because those are business type activities. So this is the large capital fund, 145. There's not a whole lot of activity going on in there right now until our projects get up and running again. And then your 146 fund, there is no activity going on. The difference between the two is the 145 is for more of your large capital projects, and the 146 is for your smaller capital that's paid out of the rates. Those are the difference between those two. And then the next financials are your internal service funds. And these are what we were talking about. We established these several years ago, trying to build these up. It takes about 3 years to build them up. Then what you do is you do a rotating schedule for replacement and some of the larger capital project repairs, those kind of things. But we're just almost there. We're getting some of them built up, so that's good. And you'll see there's the parks and there's your transportation. And I will tell you that we also move in anytime we buy vehicles, and we now buy them through the enterprise lease program, which has proven pretty well. What we do is we move the total cost of that vehicle out of the operating fund. And then we put it into your internal service fund, and then we manage those lease payments out of the internal service fund, so it doesn't affect the ongoing operations for those departments. And that's how we work that. So you will see those in mainly the transportation fund and the police, public safety, and so you'll see that being handled that way. So when you see the contractual services, it'll be your enterprise lease payments and stuff like that. Okay? And really, that's a look at your income statement, and I will move on unless there's any more questions there. I'm sorry, I'm trying to hurry. Okay, so here's a look at this is what we call the Bob Simmons report, or your cash by fund report. And really what this shows you is that all the cash that we are reporting to you by fund, we actually have in the bank and investments. And so this is what we call our savings account. It's a listing of all the funds that make up that savings account. And it shows you where all that cash is. And a lot of what I tell you almost every month is this is how you can check us. You take those income statements that we just went through and you look at that fund balance, and then you cross them over to the balance sheet and you make sure those fund balances agree. Then you can take this cash by fund report and look at the cash level on the balance sheet and tie those together as well. So these are three important financial statements on a monthly basis that give you an opportunity to really check and cross-reference where we're at. There are two funds, general fund and public safety fund, that the fund balance will not agree, and those are because of those minor funds that I named for you, and I'll be glad to do it again. The minor funds that are wrapped up, I believe there's a safety account, and the courts funds and the general fund, and then the police have a lot of little forfeiture funds and grant funds in there that make up the difference for that as well. And we do a reconciling item every month to make sure those go to zero. So if you want to see those, we're happy to let you see the reconciliations as well on that. Okay, yes, sir.
That asterisk, the 120 fund, would you scroll up?
Okay.
So is the 120 fund reference, oh, that's the convention center?
Yes, and let me explain that for you. So in the past, when we switched property management, we used to have it Hilton, and we did a three-way split, and they managed our convention center. When we switched over to a different property management company, along with that came some cash reserves, because those cash reserves are owned by the city. So they sent them back to us, and so we held those on the city's books under the city's cash, because most of the convention center cash, they report in their own funds. But because we're a governmental fund, we had to report it this way. Well, last year, they needed those funds, and we transferred those funds, and it was approved, and we gave them those funds. So that is sitting at zero. You'll probably see that come off after this next year. You'll see that come off, and there won't be a line item for that anymore, because all of the cash is reported on the convention center's books. But we held on to that cash, and we were glad we did, because they needed it, and we were able to give it to them. And that's why we put an asterisk down there, so you don't think, oh my goodness, convention center doesn't have any cash, because that was just an extra reserve fund we had for them. Okay. This is a look at your tourism, same thing, and we also do one for the public safety as well.
We go back up to that, please.
Uh-huh. Public safety or tourism, which one?
Tourism.
Okay.
The 15 million in the tourism fund account, what does that represent?
Cash. If you look down at the bottom, it'll tell you where all that cash is held.
15 million of cash.
Okay, well, some of that is restricted for debt service too, so that's not all spendable dollars. That is cash, and we invest it, and we invest the debt service funds and those kind of things, but those are not all spendable dollars. So I would say about 8 million of that is restricted for debt service.
Leaving about 7 million in cash.
True. I would say so, I can get you all those definite numbers, and it'll be on the audit as well, but, yeah. I always have to give that caveat, because when you see that, you're thinking, woo, yay, but no. Those are restrictions, and we can't touch those until all the debt issues are gone.
I understand that, but I'm still saying woo-hoo for 7 million in cash.
Oh, yeah, I would say that this city's done a good job of trying to build that fund back up. A lot of that has to do with, we cut capital projects. We've cut a lot of things, especially during the COVID year. If you recall, during the COVID year, we did away with, we cut all the one-time expenditures. We cut all the capital across the board. We froze positions and all those things because we were assuming we are zero revenue for 5 of our bigger months, and how is that going to affect the city? So when we adjusted that, we hoped for better, but that was a very conservative approach to how can we maintain the city financially through this time period. So if we did better, we knew the reserves were going to come up because we were doing better. We still didn't spend that money because there were so much unknowns, we couldn't. That's why we're going to do a reevaluation at the end of July to see where we stand.
Because out of the 7 million, if 25% of that would be for marketing, right? So that's $1,750,000.
Well, we keep $125,000 reserve for
Right.
marketing. Most of the marketing dollars are spent. So that reserve will be capital, because if you recall, we break it down 25 and 75. So the 75 is all capital, but the 25, most of that goes to the chamber when we do a reassessment. So we also, anything that's left over after we keep that 125 reserve, we do it in the form of a rollover and put it on the chamber's budget for the following year. Does that make sense? Because the way it's written, okay, we keep 500,000 budget-wise for the convention center. We do 125 the contingency, and then we do 125,000 reserve. And after that, everything else rolls to the chamber. So we have to wait. We can assume they get their budget in their budget year. Once the final year of the tourism tax has been determined and audited, then we go through a process of calculating whatever rollover they may have, and they attach it onto their following year's budget. That's really how the process works. I don't anticipate, since we were down 34% 2020, there will be a whole lot of rollover dollars for this next year. But again, we are still going to go through the same process and calculate it just to make certain.
Okay, I know we're trying to rush through this, but I'd like to understand this. Out of the $1,750,000, that is roughly 25% of the 7 million we're talking about. I'm going to understand the 500,000 for the convention center, 125 for
That marketing contingency?
contingency, and then 125,000 for reserve.
Correct.
So generally speaking, we're talking about $1 million in cash that's earmarked for marketing.
No. So in this cash, you will have about 125,000 of the marketing, because everything else we try to roll out and roll over to the chamber. Does that make sense? I have a model that I can show you. If you want to come in, I'll show it to you. It would be a little bit clearer, but when we get the revenue in, we have to remove all of the money that goes to the TIF districts first, and then we calculate that 25% revenue based off of what's left over. And what's left over is we do a budget for the chamber, the budget for the convention center, the budget for the marketing contingency, and then we have 125,000 of reserve left over. So the idea behind that is that the chamber gets all the dollars left over, with exception of that $125,000 reserve. There'll be a time span. There could be a timing issue there of when it rolls over versus when it's used, and that could be a little bit, but I wouldn't anticipate it being $1 million out of that cash fund. However, we're going to be doing that. That process will come to this finance committee, the calculation and everything, in August, and you'll be able to see exactly what that is. But if you want to know that beforehand, I'll show you the model that we use, and it'll help define it a little bit better for you.
I'd like to see
Yeah,
that. Thank you.
absolutely. Okay, so those are the cash by fund reports. The next ones are your balance sheets, and if you'll look at.
I'm sorry, Jamie. I
yes?
didn't see that previous screen we went
Sorry,
past.
that was the public safety cash by fund.
So again, is that 6.1 million public safety fund account, is that cash or cash plus capital improvements?
Well, so this will be, if you look at, there's a 562,000 of that that's in their internal service fund. And then you can see that police has 2.8 million, fire has 2.7 million. You following over there? So that's where the breakdown of that money goes.
But, so that is or is not cash?
That is cash. Yeah, that's the breakdown of where their cash, and it'll show you down at the bottom the investments and where it's all held at.
So out of the 6.1 million, the BOK investment account of 5.3, that is 5.3 of the 6.1 that's in an investment account.
Let me see, investments, 5.3 million, yes. And when you see on their funds, the interest income and those kind of things, and how well we're doing on the interest incomes, that's because we invest it. And that's where those investments are held, and we earn monies, we earn revenues that goes back into those funds because we invest it.
Is that one investment account or more than one?
No, you'll see an investment account on the public safety fund, and you'll see an investment account on all the funds, and we split that money out. So you'll see interest income on general fund, transportation, public safety, water, sewer. We keep all of those separate, and we track them all separately. Yes, sir.
So they're all in separate investment funds?
Sure. Yeah, we have a investment banking, and we monitor those on a monthly basis. Sure.
And this 5.3 million is in
Bank of Oklahoma investment accounts.
accounts?
Uh-huh.
So it's not just one fund?
Investment, there's different investments, but it's in, so like public safety will be in one account with different investments wrapped around it, and we keep so much liquid. So we keep so much liquid because we're earning a higher yield on the liquid than we would be, say, at a local bank at this moment in time. And so we keep so much more liquid there because we earn a little bit more. And also the liquid gives us an opportunity if we have a problem or a natural occurrence or we need cash fast, that we could draw it back in 24
I
hours.
understand that. Mike, Bank of, what is it?
Bank of Oklahoma.
Oh, Bank of Oklahoma.
Also Bank of Kansas City.
So is there a separate fund, investment fund, for the public safety tax?
There's a separate account for public safety. There's a separate account
That's
for
what I
the
was asking.
savings.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Here's the balance sheet. And just to answer your question specifically on the statues, you want to scroll up a little bit, Trace? Due to other funds liability, you see that 962,000. Portion of that is what we owe the tourism tax for the statues. It's about a little more than 500,000. It's wrapped up in a liability because we had to assume the bulk of that in the general fund as far as part of the balance sheet, and then we transfer that over to the tourism tax.
Okay. The 962,
A portion of that due to other funds is the statute. Yes, about a little more than $500,000, yes, absolutely.
okay, so what's the other 400,000?
I knew you were gonna ask me that. I don't know off the top of my head, but I can get you that, I'm sorry. Yeah. I don't have a breakdown of balance sheet in front of me, but I do at my office, so. We'll write that down and we'll just send it out to the whole committee so y'all can understand where that come from. Okay, so that's those are the balance sheets, and you can go down through those. Those shows you the cash, those shows the AR, the liabilities, and what all the breakdown is of that. And again, just remember, you can always cross-reference the fund balances for the balance sheet back to the income statement, back to the cash by fund to see where everything's going and how the flow is of your financial statements. And I will just offer this too, if any of, I'm sorry, yes, sir?
Well, I know we're scrolling through these balance sheets.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Weren't some of the questions going to be answered in the balance sheets?
The statute, was there another one that I was gonna answer? I knew the statute one, but I did not recall if there was another one. Was there another one? Anybody else aware of that? Okay. Oh, well, if you want to see the convention center one, I know we touched on that a bit. Trace, can you scroll to the convention center? It's kind of making me dizzy a little bit, going so fast. Okay, right there. Okay, so you see here when we talked about that cash reserves, city held, this is where you would have cross-referenced that with the cash by fund report. You can see it says 0 on here, and it was 0 over there. That's because we used to hold that, and we transferred that last year to the convention center. All these other cash and investments and those kind of things, these are held on the convention center property management's reports, okay? But we still, because they are known as a governmental fund, we still have to put them as a governmental fund and report them. But they send us about on the 12th of every month their financials. We go through and do a mini audit of their financials, and then we put them on our books, okay? Were there any more questions on the balance sheets? Yes, sir.
I don't have a, excuse me, I don't have a question on the balance sheets, but the model that you spoke of? For
The tourism model?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that something that you can show to this whole committee, so?
Yes, I can.
Everyone.
Now, it's a really big, long model, and it's a good-sized model. So what we'll do is we'll bring the Excel spreadsheet here so that we can show you the flow and how it works. And then I can do like snapshots and stuff of a certain year. We actually have that. We created that back when I first got here. It goes back to like 98. So that we can say, okay, this agrees back to the CAFR, and then how does it roll, and where the breakdown of all the tourism tax goes. So when I say it's a large model, it's a really large one, but I bet we could figure it out to show you and break it down for you. And I can bring it here, and if y'all are interested, you can come to my office, whatever, and I will be able to sit down with y'all and show it and walk you through it too,
How
certainly.
long would something like that take?
Well, it just
Time frame.
depends. You know, it depends on the detail that you want to see. I'm happy to show you anything and everything and all the processes we do, but for just that tourism model, I can show you probably fairly quickly, but I'm sure you're going to have questions on that because it'll talk about your debt service, it'll talk about the transfers, it'll talk about the rollovers and all of those kind of things and how we keep track of all of that. So that's just really up to you on the timing, and whatever time you have, we'll just book it, and we'll just try to make it work within that time frame. And/or I can bring it here, but it'll probably take, I would say, here, maybe a bulk of the time for the meeting. So if y'all want to do a special meeting and walk through that, we can do that as well.
And maybe a excuse me, a summary of the process?
Summary of the process.
And the timing of the
Sure.
process.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. Okay, any more questions on the balance sheets? The next reports are just the reports for your information. We keep these up. These are other things that go on in the finance department as far as the license activity. The first column is the new business license, the second one is the renewals, and the third one is any of the transfers, anytime a business transfers, so that you can see what the true activity is. This is just for your informational purposes. The next couple of reports are. So we don't typically go over a lot of it unless you have questions, but I wanted y'all to be able to see. We update those on a monthly basis. Again, this is our procurement. These are the bids that we have sent out, the dates, bid numbers, all of those as well. And then the other one is our consumption reports. And it just occurred to me, I look at those reports all the time. Y'all might want to see those reports. So we started giving you these reports, I want to say the first of this year, just so that you could be able to cross-reference some of those back to your financial statements if you so desired, so.
Could I see the 3-year sewer or water consumption?
Sure, scroll up. There you go. First column's 21, then you have a running total, so basically your year-to-date, then you have 20 and 19, and then you have your variances.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so those are all of the reports. The financial report. So what's the next one? This one I went over in detail last time, so we're just going to keep this up here just as a reminder to show you all the public safety, where we're at. Remember assumptions, we assumed a 1% growth, but we give you to show how much 2% and 3% will make up. Also, I left the assumptions on my desk, however, I think I've got it in memory, that the debt service for that, the debt service for that public safety starts in 2023. So, and that would include both, thank you, that would include both the police and fire for that. So you'll start seeing that in 2023.
Which debt service, Jamie?
They, assuming the police and fire station's debt service. So it was about a $13 million. We assumed, again, just assumptions, we assumed 3 million and 10 million, 3 for fire, 10 for police. And so we started that. Now, here's the caveat on that. If it's a 20-year debt service, it was a 25-year tax, 2023 is really the last year you can take out a 20-year debt service because your tax will sunset. So we got to keep all of that in mind as well. Those are some of those things that we need to know and we need to keep our eye on. Okay, so then you have your expenditures and your assumptions for this graph. I'm going to go over them again really quickly. We assumed a 1% tax growth, which again is not much, but the difference between 1, 2, and 3% is really small. Okay, so then you have we assumed 911 fees. We assumed flat for 100,000 because we're just never 100% sure of where we're going to land with those. So 100% is pretty consistent. And we assumed in interest, we assumed a 1% growth and a 1% growth on the fees and the permits. I'm just trying to tell you all the assumptions that are built into this graph, okay? On the expenditure side, the growth of 5% for wages and benefits, growth of 3% for all of the major expenditures, okay? And again, we went over the debt. Starting the 2023, we assumed a transfer of $350,000 for fire out to the internal service fund. That's really to help them build up their replacement schedules and those kind of things for fire trucks and other things that they might need. The annual police department transfer is $250,000, and we grew that at 3%. The $250,000 is mainly for about 6 vehicles every year, okay? That's where that comes from, and we grew it at 3% because obviously the cost of everything just seems to be climbing, so we wanted to build that in as well. And so starting at 2023, 100,000 of additional capital for both police and fire is also assumed in this grant. So if you can look at this grant, the picture of this is not great. It's not good. Great, it's just not good. So there's going to be some things that we're going to have to do to flip the way this graph looks. The green line's the revenues, the red line's the expenditures, and there's too large of a gap. Okay, so we just have some work that we're going to have to do, and just the wisdom that we need from this committee and from all of us putting our heads together, because we've got to get that graph flipped, if you know what I'm saying. So.
Jamie, would you go through the percentage of expense increases again?
The assumptions, sure. So we grew inside this graph, the assumption is a 5% wage and benefit increase, which that's typical and that's normal, and that's why we did that. We didn't want anything outlandish. A growth of 3% of all of the major expenditures. And that's pretty consistent as well. And then, do you need me to do the debt service again too, all of the expenditures, or just those two things?
That's fine.
Okay.
So one question, and I don't know, but I'm assuming this would, I don't know if it would be a budget finance question or a Board of Aldermen question. When the public safety tax was approved, generally speaking, 7.6 million was being transferred from our general fund to the public safety tax fund annually.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct, I'm sorry.
So, but as I recall, there was no percentage of increase annually from the general fund to the public safety tax fund. So in 10 years from now, there's still 7.6 million being transferred from general fund to the public safety tax.
That's correct. The discussion was, and the idea behind that was, any growth would be assumed by the tax. That, at least the conversations that we were in and the discussion that we were in.
I wonder if we'd want to readdress that, because the percentages, I mean, just looking at the chart, I mean, that's an ugly chart.
It is.
Couldn't we address that by looking at these same percentages of increases that the fund is going to experience for expenses? If we had that same percentage of increase from the general, on that 7.6 million, from the general fund to the public safety tax fund, that would have to address this.
Well, and I understand what you're saying, but I would also say the general fund is important as well, and if you start taking more, this is just my opinion, so I'm just sharing this with you. If you start taking more from the general fund, you don't want the pictures of every fund to start to look like this. But I would tell you that decision would be all of y'all's. I'll just be here to report the facts. I'm just trying to show you what we're up against. I don't make those decisions, but if you're asking for my opinion, and I'm not sure that you were, but that would be my opinion, is we need to be very cautious about taking from other funds to offset other funds. It doesn't matter which fund, we just got to be real careful that we graph out long-term possibly all funds to see if it's a possibility for one fund to help another fund out. Or do we take another approach and say, okay, let's look at the bigger picture. What can we do to fix this if we just keep it consistent with the funds that we're looking at? What are some ways, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head, I'll tell you that, but what are some ways that we can be strategic and help this graph to flip without taking from other funds? That's another discussion, and I'm not sure I have that answer for you, but that is something that we're keeping and looking at and talking about, and Michael Pinkley's helped us, and trying to think of other ways and other ideas how to help this, because we're the management for all funds, and we want to make sure all funds are successful.
Okay, because as I recall, when the public safety tax was approved, it was approved for certain things, right? We want to build a new fire and police department, we want to add staff, that monies was earmarked for certain items. I don't think that the monies was earmarked for a 5% wage increase from all the existing police officers, from all the existing firemen. I guess I'm just raising the question. I know it was approved and that 7.6 million is a fixed number. I know we don't want to keep robbing from Peter to pay Paul, but in this example, to be fair to the public safety tax fund and for it to have longevity, I think it's only fair to say, what is the percentage of increase that we're anticipating in our expenses, and why wouldn't those increases, those percentages, apply to the 7.6 million?
Just in just a discussion back and forth, I would say I could flip that conversation and say, why is it fair to take from all the other departments to give to this department. It's just a discussion, that's something that we can have, and I'm just open to suggestions, and I think everybody is. But I just want to show you the picture of what we're up against and probably what the conversations need to be. Again, it's not my decision, and I just present the facts to you, and I will certainly help you do my very best to come up with ways to make sure that it's complete, level, and fair for the entire city.
Okay, if you would, if we could, let's remove opinions, because I know when you
Yeah,
said.
that's all
we
I've
don't want
got
it to
right now.
affect other departments. If we're looking at just this fund,
Okay,
I would appreciate if this board could receive another analysis.
okay,
Of taking what the fixed amount is that's going to the general fund, applying the same percentages of increases as an increase to the fixed 7.6 million, and see what that looks like.
okay. Yeah, we can do that. And keep in mind, when we did the public safety tax, we added a lot of officers. We added fire people. And so if I want to make sure that I'm getting what you want correct, we will keep all the additions to all of the staffing outside of that and just go back from the 2017 picture of growth. So anything we added, so the 19 officers and the 6 firefighters and all of these additional expenses that we've done as a result of the public safety tax, I will set aside and not do a growth on those. I will just do a growth on the picture of where we were at in 2017 when we determined the dollar amount. Is that what you're asking me to do?
Now that you mention it, I'd like to see both.
Okay, okay. Well, how about this? We'll do our best. If I bring you something and you don't like it, just tell me you want something different, okay?
Jamie, the revenue line, that does include that 7.6
It
million
does.
with no change in it.
It does,
So if that stays static,
yes.
that's what we're looking at. The public safety tax, was it restricted to just building the police and fire station and adding, in other words, if the mayor's saying, it was passed with that in mind, I mean, probably, likely, I don't remember, but did it exclude other things? In other words, did it exclude giving raises? Did it exclude, so it's, I guess my question is it okay to include those, how you've done it here, because the public safety tax doesn't exclude or prohibit us from including that as part of the money, that money we can spend?
Right, that's really actually correct, because it's really a general sales tax specifically for public safety. So it's really the same for transportation tax and your general fund tax. It is a sales tax to accommodate, in this case, the public safety, which would mean salaries and or anything else. So yes, if I understood your question, that's correct.
Thank you.
Jamie, let's hit on something real quick. I'm going to read from the RSMO, specifically stating, including but not limited to expenditures on equipment, public safety employees, salaries, benefits, facilities for police, fire, and emergency medical providers. It didn't exclude any type of increases, because I co-chaired that group. The issue that I think Larry was on top of, and I think is a good one, is that what we agreed to is that the money that was moved over out of the general fund could not drop less than FY17 levels unless there was a 10% drop in revenues. That's right. And we did have that last year. But nothing precluded, as Larry was alluding to, the city, if it has additional monies in general revenues, to add a contribution greater than the 7.6 million.
Not to my knowledge, so that's why I said that would be completely up to the board and y'all's decision as to how you wanted to handle that. Again, I'll give you any facts you want, but at the end of the day, it's y'all's decision, not mine.
So Jamie, that also includes, though, just kind of what the fixed cost or the capital cost estimate was.
Yes.
And so the sticky wicket could be, what's that actually going to cost?
That's correct. These are, again,
That's
assumptions.
not necessarily built into the model.
That's right. These are assumptions, and so it's always healthy, and it doesn't matter what fund we're talking about, it's always healthy to view the long-term picture to see the true financial health of what we're up against. So if we keep going at the rate we're going, and we keep doing all these large expenditures and stuff like that, regardless of what fund we're talking about, obviously, if you think about it in terms of your home accounts, if you only have $10 in the bank, you can't go out and buy a $100 pair of shoes. So it's kind of that same concept, just on a much bigger scale.
Jamie,
Go ahead.
what percentage of the city's overall revenue does that 7.6 million represent on a typical year?
7.6, I want to say it was right around 51%, but just let me take a quick look. So if we are assuming, let's see, 17.5. If you look at the budget for the general fund on the income statement, you can see it was about a $7.5 million in revenues. And if you assume a $7.6 million, so you're a little bit less than 50%. So 17.5. You're just a little bit less than 50%, high 40s.
So for purposes of my question, let's assume it's 45%
Sure.
of our annual revenue. If we had and I get what you're saying about, not necessarily pulling money from other departments, because we have a lot of departments, but let's say we have a year where revenues are up 10%, 5%, whatever, take your pick. If the increase was proportional, so in other words, if we're transferring 45% of our revenue, generally speaking, but we have a year where the city does well or exceeds our revenue projections, and let's say there's an extra $3 million, if you're proportionally transferring it or adding to this transfer to the public safety fund, would that be, it seems to me like that could make sense.
Yeah, that
where
makes sense to me as well.
If we have $3 million extra dollars. and
What do we do
say-
with this extra besides put it in reserve?
That would be something I would
Sure.
maybe want to look at, is if it's proportional to what we're already transferring and there is the need to close this gap because we do need to do these things, is that a potential way to do it?
And I would say that when we do the reevaluation of the finances here at the end of July, that would be a really good discussion to have, certainly for that. So to see where we're at, again, we would have to look at the whole year picture, but to see where we're at and where we're falling versus where we budgeted, those kind of things, that would be a good time for that discussion to come into play.
Thank you.
And conceptually, and I agree with what Alderman Fenton said, conceptually, with a fixed amount of 7.6, if this board doesn't make a change or a future board doesn't make a change, then they'll have 7.6 million in 10 years. They'll have 7.6 million in 20 years, right?
Yeah, I think the idea, well, and years ago, the idea was that the tax was going to grow. So you were going to have an increase in tax. Unfortunately, we had that pandemic, and now things are going to change. So yes, you are exactly right. 7.6, it was taken from the 17 budget for the 2, and that's what we've done. Now, again, that's up to you all on how you manage that, but certainly I'll present you the graphs and let you see reality. Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I think Mr. Pinkley has it.
I'm just
Sure.
waiting to get my turn
Sorry
here.
about that.
Just a couple of things, and I think one was answered, of course, but I think the 7.6 is closer to 7.7,
Yeah, that's true.
and I just wanted to make sure that that was included in that income. But the other question, I had two, and the other one is, this graph, as ugly as it is, doesn't represent our required reserves of 20%. So is that green line the 20%? Does that include our reserves, or we could hit that before we get to that point?
Well, the problem is with the graph like it is, your operations are consuming your reserve. So typically the idea behind it is your revenues and your expenditures, in order to have a balanced year, those go to zero and then you have your reserve left over. So revenues minus expenditures, anything left over drops into your reserve. So if your revenues are over your expenditures, which is a good picture, then the excess drops down into your reserve, thereby increasing your reserve. But if your expenditures are greater than your revenues, then you have to pull from your reserves just to be able to operate. Does that make sense?
It does, but there's not gonna be enough to do that.
No, I mean, you'll go through your reserves pretty quick here.
Correct. So those are the only things that I wanted to say, and the other part is that rather than debate this today, I know that this is gonna be in our upcoming meeting when we start our budget process.
Yes,
And
yeah,
this
we'll
will
go through
be-
this in detail.
This will be in detail, and we will resolve it, or we will address it at that time.
Yes. I just want to make sure and keep it in front of you always so that it's rotating in your mind about, here's some of the things that we really need to pay attention to.
What's the percent of reserve that we need in this account?
20%.
20%. Jerry, that was a very good point, including the reserve in there. Thank you.
And just one more real quick thing, Jamie, and I apologize.
You're all right.
We had some very difficult discussions when this all happened. And there was a mindset of only doing an 8% sales tax that, quite frankly, would have done nothing for us. So we were able to compromise, finally got to a half cent. And what you all have said, Mayor and the rest of you, yes, we finally agreed that they would be able to lock in at 7.6, almost 7.7. But that was with the caveat that I knew in 2028 there was going to be a TIF coming off. So it's getting to that point where we can come up with the funds to come back and say there should be, because I completely agree with you, and this was my argument all along, there should be some percentage offset of growth just in case this public safety sales tax itself isn't keeping up with the needs of the community.
Sure.
And so it's just, that was really the offset I wanted you all to know about, because it was a debate back and forth, and quite frankly, the Parks Department was what was used by, I think it was Alderman Booth, to make sure that we didn't take so much money from everybody else for the public safety departments that the departments like the park lost money, but there still has to be common sense. And while, yes, they locked it in at that, they did not lock it in forever. You all will have the opportunity, when we have the right funding mechanism in place, to increase that, which, and again, the first thing that came to my mind was when those TIFs come off.
Sure.
So I think and you guys are spot on. Unfortunately, we're having to have the discussion a whole lot earlier than I thought we were going to have.
Yeah. So what I heard you say was, knowing those TIFs are going to come off in 2028, what you want to see a graph that starts in 2028,
Yeah,
and it'll be
yeah,
smooth sailing.
yeah, because
However,
I know, here we go again.
Debbie Downer there.
let me just clarify that just because, well, I have to be that person, but just because the TIFs are coming up, there's still debt issues against some of those.
Let us run with this. This is great news in our minds.
Well, okay, but you have to understand that 100% of that's not going to be usable because there's still some debt issues that go to 29, 31, and even 34. We're trying to get that manageable, and hopefully before then, maybe refi and get some of that down. But you always have to know reality picture too. So that's the only reason why I said that.
Thank you for that, Debbie.
Just call me Debbie.
And not to mention the fact that everything else proportionately is gonna continue.
Yes, the
Expenses go
cost
up.
increase and inflation
So
is.
it's the balance.
Yes, yes. Now that I made you all happy, okay, are we ready to move on? Because I think we have auditors in the background waiting. And yes, just to clarify, this is a draft, and we went through the process typically. Just so some of you are aware, we took it to the board on Tuesday night. However, typically, we usually take it to the Finance Committee first. And I tried to take it to the board just as a matter of timing. We did end up rolling it, so the Finance Committee is the proper way to do it first. So I have Amy on the line with Cochran Head and Vic to present. Oh, I skipped one, didn't I? I'm so sorry.
That's what I was trying to bring you back to.
Okay, well, let me pause on that statement, and here's the disbursements. And we do need a motion on this one.
So move.
Hold it, I had one question on this.
Yes, sir.
I know this is, and we'll save this conversation for another day, but just for clarity, the 40,000, the second line item for HCW, the $40,000 for their fountain and maintenance contribution, generally speaking, the HCW pays the city roughly $450,000 a year
For lease.
for the lease and their percentage rent, right? Their lease is fixed at $250 plus a percentage up to something equals $450. And in return, the city pays HCW $450,000.
It's getting up there, yes, sir. That's correct. That was all done before I came, just so you know. But yes, that's accurate. And it's really a good way to track it, but. What was your question? Is
I
that,
was just, I thought I saw the same number coming in,
It's
same
true.
number going out. Okay,
yes,
thank you.
There's a pretty good breakdown in the audit, actually.
yes, there is. Absolutely. And we will need a motion. Did we already get one of those from y'all?
Yeah, I think so moved.
We had a
I'll
motion?
second that.
In a second.
All in favor? Say aye. Opposed, same sign? Ayes have it.
Okay, so then picking up where I was talking about a while ago, just really quickly, so we're back here. It is a draft, but typically we do present the draft to the Finance Committee. The final will be presented to the board on July the 13th. But Amy is on the other line with Cochran, Head, and Vic. She is the audit manager, and she's going to go over their report. Do we have her?
Amy, can you hear us okay?
Amy went to sleep.
I believe you're on mute right now.
Okay, how about now?
Perfect. So you have the room, and can you see the council as well right now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. You are good to go.
Okay, and then I need to share my screen so you can see the presentation, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, are you guys able to see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as Jamie introduced, I'm Amy Tharnish. I'm with Cochran Head Vic, and I want to thank you for having me present this morning and allowing CHV to perform the city's audit this year. So I wanted to start by introducing the firm. So we have been serving the Missouri and Kansas area since 1975.
Excuse me, Amy.
We have,
Amy?
Yep.
Excuse me. We're trying to put your screen.
I'm working through that, sorry.
Hold on 1 second, please.
okay, that's no problem. Let me know when you're ready.
She's sharing her screen. It should be full screen. Let me pull this back over. I'm so confused right now. One moment. Is she sharing her screen?
Thank you, report, Amy. Does anybody have any questions?
You are sharing your screen right now?
I am, yes. Do you want me to stop my screen share and try again?
Yes, please.
Okay.
We see your name, so we obviously you're, but nothing on the screen.
Okay.
Okay, that's way better. Yeah, you can make that full screen if you don't want. So start your presentation
Yep.
By going to slideshow and start slideshow. I think it's, do you have two monitors? Perfect, right there. Okay.
They're all turned off.
Okay, one moment. Okay, you can proceed. We see your certified public accountants list right now.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, I just wanted to kind of introduce CHV and kind of left off with our peer review. So we have been awarded the highest rating given as a result of our peer review. What a peer review is when another audit firm actually comes in and audits us and verifies that we are performing our audits in accordance with auditing standards. And then we are a member of several organizations as listed here and licensed in Missouri and Kansas. So let's move to the scope of the audit. So we were engaged to audit the basic financial statements and the comprehensive annual financial report, which I know we've provided you with a draft on. And because the city will submit that the comprehensive annual financial report to Emma, and they also submit it for participation in the GFOA Certification of Achievement. They have, you guys, the city has received this award for 15 consecutive years, which is outstanding. So as part of our audit, we as auditors have a few responsibilities. We have to conduct our audit in accordance with both generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. We have to plan and perform the audit to obtain reasonable assurance that there are no material misstatements. And we have to report on internal controls and that the city is in compliance with laws and regulations. So those are our responsibilities. And then at the conclusion of our audit, we're required to communicate certain items to you as the governing board. So first is regarding illegal acts, and we are pleased to report that no illegal acts came to our attention during the audit. Second is regarding changes in significant accounting policies, and during the year, the city did implement GASB 84, which is in regards to fiduciary activities. And so this applies to the city's landscape trust, and it's reported as a custodial fund. And so really all that standard did was change that from the use of an agency fund to a fiduciary fund. And we report the statements in the annual report on pages 23 and 24. So it changed the look of the statements very, very minorly, but otherwise there was no other significant change on that fund. And there were no other accounting policies implemented during the year. We did not encounter any difficulties during the audit and did not have any disagreements with management. And we had full cooperation from finance staff and other city staff during the audit, and were given full access to any and all records requested. So the audit is going to, it addresses three basic questions. So the first question is, are the financial statements free of material misstatements? In this case, yes, we intend on issuing an unmodified opinion that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. So Jamie had mentioned that you have been presented with a draft. The annual report right now is in our quality review process. And that's really the final step before we go final. And so right now, it's just going through that review, and there'll just be like a few minor cosmetic changes, making sure that the annual report is in its best presentational form, and then we'll be able to go final. So we don't anticipate any changes to any numbers or anything of that nature. We also answer the question, are internal controls over financial reporting adequately designed and operating effectively? And we did not identify any items during the audit that we consider to be a material weakness. And that's really critical. They're doing a great job implementing internal controls. And then, did the city comply with finance-related laws and regulations? And in our opinion, yes, the city did comply with laws and regulations. So as part of our audit, we do also like to present any other management, we call them management letter comments, and these are just suggestions for best practices. And in our letter this year, we put something about cybersecurity, and that's really just stated as a reminder. We know that the city has processes and controls in place in regards to cybersecurity, but with the world the way it is, we like to just put that out there as a reminder. And then because GASB likes to issue new pronouncements, we just list some of the future accounting pronouncements that are up and coming just for awareness. And I think just based on looking at the list, the one that finance will need to review is GASB 87, which is on leases. But they have some time on that. It doesn't go into effect until 2022. So that concludes kind of the formal part of the presentation, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the city administrator, Mr. Dobbins, and Jamie for their assistance during the audit. And along with their staff, the finance staff did a fantastic job and were great to work with, and really appreciate all their hard work. So that kind of ends my presentation if anybody has any questions.
Mayor, I got a question. And I do appreciate you allowing me to be part of the entrance and exit interview of this particular audit. This issue that has been floating around town of the supplementing versus supplanting of the public safety funds, I had asked you specifically to put this thing to rest because in talking with you all, you felt you did that last year, and you stated also this year that we're all good on material misstatements. There weren't any internal control deficiencies, no non-compliance issues. According to your opinion as a certified public accountant, did you find any evidence of supplanting public safety funds?
No, we did not. If anything would have come to our attention, we would have been required to report that.
And you didn't find any evidence of wrongdoing or misapplication of any of those funds?
No, and during our audit, we do detailed testing of numerous accounts where we look at both revenue and expenditures.
I appreciate your attention to that.
Absolutely.
Amy, let me ask the question a different way. Did your firm review the public safety tax fund looking primarily at any funds being supplanted, or I think your comment was nothing was brought to your attention? Was there an audit done on addressing any supplanting in the public safety tax fund?
The public safety tax fund is a fund that is within the scope of the audit, so it's considered a major fund. And so on page 16 and 18 of the annual report, those are kind of the major funds that the audit entails. And so any of our testing and risk assessments that we look at would include the public safety fund. So we look at and audit the public safety fund along with all of the other major funds. We wouldn't do any additional procedures that would be different outside of the scope of the audit in regards to the public safety fund unless you hired us to do so.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is without you having the copy of the agreement of how the public safety tax funds were to be used and compare that with how the funds were expensed, what you're saying in the audit is the math adds up. You just don't know if there was, without you having the agreement, you wouldn't know if there was any funds being supplanted.
Well, we do testing of expenditures, so we look at expenditures that are being made and how they're reported and what they're for. So we do look at that as part of the audit. But no, there was no evidence of any supplanting.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Mayor, I'd just like to make a statement. I think that what she said in there is what he said last year, and then they said again this year. We need to put the rest of this issue in this community that supplanting is going on in the public safety fund. I think she said it last year and said it this year, and we should put an end to that.
Alderman Gaines, with all due respect, I believe when the question was asked last time, the response was something similar to, we did not discover.
I don't think she could have been any more clear in saying no, and I think we need to put an end to it. It's not good for the community. It's just not. And this stuff that's floating around out there is no good, just zero good.
Well, if I would quit being asked questions about it, I would quit raising the question.
Just tell them no. The auditor told you no.
Amy, did you read the agreement about how the public safety tax funds were to be allocated?
I have not seen that agreement, no.
So then if you don't know what was in the agreement, how would you know if there was any funds being supplanted?
Here we go again. She just
Let her
said
ask
no.
her, let her answer the
She
question.
just said no, and you're not accepting it.
I think maybe to help with
I would
this-
like Amy to answer the question.
And maybe to help with this, first off, what agreement, because it was actually an ordinance that said what the public safety sales tax fund would be used for. So there is not this agreement, it's actually an ordinance. Maybe if we provided that to her, it would help her to understand what you're asking.
My point with Alderman Gaines is if she hasn't seen, instead of the word agreement, I'll use the word ordinance. If she hasn't seen the ordinance that says what the funds are to be used for and not to be used for, it's hard for me to accept, yes, we have reviewed these funds and there is no supplanting.
Well, I think,
We have seen the ordinance, and I apologize for that, but the expenditures that we test, we do on a sample basis. So we don't test 100% of the expenditures that are coming in and out of the city. So we do a sample based on all of the funds. And so any sample that we test, and if it relates to the public safety fund, we would look to see, yes, does this expenditure relate to public safety? But we do not test 100% of all the transactions.
Okay, and I can appreciate that. In the normal testing process, is there a standard percentage that is tested?
No, there's not a standard percentage. A lot of times we will do it based off of a scope, or we do a lot of times randomly select. So we would have like a random generator pick transactions throughout the audit. So that way there's not any persuasion on which ones we're selecting. So a lot of that will have to do with scopes that we set and random generation.
Okay. I'll accept that. I just, maybe to cut to the chase, I'm going to ask those that keep inquiring with me for any specific examples they would like looked at.
I think that's the issue. I mean, I could sit up here and say we're supplanting, but without any specific issue or specific, what do you think is going on?
Right.
It does nobody any good to just throw out these baseless allegations. I mean, I think Amy, and you can chime in on this, but what I heard you say at the beginning of your presentation is is for 15 years running now, the city's achieved some sort of excellence award on its audit. And I think that speaks volumes to our finance department. I think that speaks volumes, to everything going on at the city. So, I mean, and with all due respect to anybody making these allegations, I would assume that these kind of things would be caught in an audit, caught by our finance department. So, absent some specific, specific issue, and maybe that's something we can look into, I tend to agree with Alderman Skanes in that I don't know, it feels like we're beating a dead horse when we've got a history here of the audit coming back good. I know your department had just recently won some awards that was brought to our attention, and so I would say kudos to you, and I think this audit, what little I understand of audits, but I read the report and seemingly everything in there was good, and so I would just ask, anybody that has a specific issue, bring it to the board or your alderperson or whoever, because to throw out these just broad allegations that the city's mismanaging this fund, or it just doesn't seem very productive and healthy to anybody. So that's just my comments, and I'll stop there. So thank you.
And I agree with you, Alderman Fenn, and I agree with Alderman Skanes. We'll either get a specific or we're going to close the door on this. Thank you.
Jamie, I'd just like to say, as I've reviewed this, I was incredibly proud of what this audit represented, especially knowing the challenges that we faced as a city during 2020. And so my hat's off to you and each member of your staff and all of our department heads here. We have a great team here, and I am so proud of you, and thank you for representing us with the facts. I know they're not always pretty, but we need to know the truth, and I believe you present that each time we have a meeting, so thank you.
Thank you very much, and the finance department does an excellent job, and so it's the whole team, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other comments? My screen went dead. Is there anything else on our?
There is the convention center report.
Oh.
I hope you can talk fast.
Where's that bucket of gumbo?
So we don't, obviously, we don't approve the audit, but do we need something showing that we're moving that forward? Maybe not necessary.
I think that we acknowledge.
Acknowledge that we
Yes,
reviewed it. Okay,
yes,
that's fine. Yeah. In the minutes. Perfect.
Yes, thank
you. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Righty. It doesn't look like Chad.
Chad, do we have the presentation up? What do you need? Good afternoon. All righty, thank you for the time. I'm going to be brief but yet succinct to give you some factual data here. The good, the bad, the ugly, as they say, but we got all good here at the convention center with a little bit of a caution. So next slide here. I'm going to start off with some highlights for the first quarter. And this presentation is nothing but first quarter. So if you remember what first quarter was like, January, February, March, our booking cycles at the convention center and every other convention and meeting space around the world has a lag time of booking. So anywhere between 18 months prior to 2 to 3 months up to that point is whenever clients start booking space, and conventions pick their cities as an example. So we're kind of going back in time in our mind. But here's some really great highlights of first quarter. STUMO, that stands for Student Mobilization Conference, that we literally took from Kansas City because Kansas City's COVID restrictions were so tight that STUMO could not host their annual large convention. And that was about 1,000 students, and these are leadership students, I must say. So these are the best and the brightest that were in town here for 3 days. Now, this was in January. We were able to, through our partnerships with the community, go out and say, okay, I know it's January and the Ferris wheel may not be running, but hey, we have 1,000 students coming in. What can we do? And they started it up. And so, they had a great time in Branson. And because of that great time, they rebooked with us for 23 and 24, which is a huge win. And we're very proud of that. Another annual convention that was executed very well, which is Conklin. And Charles Herbster, some of you may know him, incredible gentleman, large-scale businessman in multiple states. He wrote us, he felt compelled to write us a nice letter of praise. And I believe that might be the first time that's ever occurred from Mr. Herbster. He said that, quote unquote, it was the best convention he's ever had in Branson. Now, this was coming off of a COVID year. It's very, very difficult staff-wise, very difficult product-wise for deliveries, et cetera. So we had about 1,200 to 1,500 people in for 4 days in the beginning of February, which is a great month to have people in Branson. Another highlight was All-Out Championships cheer and dance. They exceeded their attendance numbers. Monass, which is the state archery tournament for the state of Missouri, 10,000 people showed up for that. That is a lot more than they thought would show up, coming off of canceling the previous year. So there's a little bit of pent-up demand there. A couple of more highlights that I'm really proud of is that the Branson Landing and Fritz's Adventure signed on to our partnership program. And what that is a sponsorship within the convention center, and we are pushing information to all of our attendees to patronize Fritz's Adventure and go to the landing and take advantage of the entertainment and the shops and the restaurants, of course. And Fritz's Adventure, a lot of meeting planners will put that on their agenda for after 5 of the meeting. Hey, let's go do a ropes course. Let's go have some fun. So those partnerships were secured and doing very well. Next slide. So the financial comparisons. The actual first quarter versus what was submitted back in August of 20, if you remember. This is representing of some cancellations that we've had. And I'll go through those in detail in a second, but basically what we're looking at is the actual number of event days in the first 3 months of 21 was slightly off 46 that was budgeted, so we had 41. We had 10 events cancel and either reschedule or outright cancel for the remainder of the year, which that equals to 33 event days. That's significant for 3 months. That's $250,000 in revenue lost. Now, this, remember, is first quarter that was contemplated, booked, anywhere between 18 months and 2-3 months prior to that time. So if we were to go back, we don't know about a vaccine. We don't know the distribution of that. We don't know about a second wave. We certainly didn't want to hear about a variant back then. So, it could have been worse, in my opinion. So impacted mainly was food and beverage, and the types of events that were impacted was social and corporate. So a lot of the corporations were saying, well, I'm not going to put my people into a meeting room, even though you were doing safe protocols there, I'm just not going to chance it. Back then, that was the mindset. Social, well, I'm just not going to have that family reunion. I'm going to kick it down the road a little bit and maybe reschedule that till later in the year. A lot of weddings, same thing. So holiday parties were non-existent of a discussion. Now, hey, we're talking about Christmas parties, so that's good news. 4 out of 10 of these events were able to reschedule within the year, and then 2 out of the 10 were rescheduled for the following year. So you can see the net income loss versus what was budgeted up here. There's a difference in revenue of $132,000, and the difference in expenses is only $38,000. So you can see in the next coming slides here where we reduce the expenses accordingly to the revenue being reduced. Can you go to the next slide?
Sam, before you go to the next slide, would you go back?
Yep. Sir? Oh,
Oop. There you go. Would you take just a minute as you go through these slides and explain that blue box in the upper right-hand corner, what that means to our community?
absolutely.
Thank you.
And I've dedicated an entire slide to that, and I wanted to tailgate, if you will, on this.
Okay.
So what you're looking at here is a budgeted difference of about $43,000 versus what we thought we would do versus what we actually did. That investment, and I'll go into detail more, equal to $13 million of community impact. And there's a breakdown of how that's calculated and what does that mean. But as we all know, the convention center is an investment to the community. It's an investment to assist in economic impact for the greater good of all. So that greater good equal to $13 million in only 1 quarter, 3 months, $13 million. And this is not my number that I've calculated, okay? So it's not self-serving at all. The Chamber of Commerce has the industry standard calculator that they use. I give them the event information, and they literally spit out the number in different categories. So, you know, certainly it is what every city is using. Okay, next slide. This is similar information but stated differently. So if you look at adjusted gross income, which is 21 actual for first quarter versus what we thought we would do versus what was done in 2020. Now, COVID was not prevalent until April and May. So this does not account for COVID yet. So if you were to look at it, our revenues were off about $180,000, right? Because we're still in the COVID mindset in first quarter and not in 2020. However, this is where I really like to point out that the total indirect expenses are much lower. So in 2020 actual, we're at $735,000 of the expenses versus 2020 last year, that time, of almost $1 million of expenses. So as we saw the revenues decreasing, we cut expenses dramatically to correspond. Very important. What that equated to is the bottom line of an actual first quarter of $329,878 versus what we thought we would do, which would be just slightly better, of $286. However, if you look at 2020, we actually are tracking better than last year pre-COVID. So that is a good sign in my opinion. That's a green flag. Here's some indirect expenses that I want to point out that were really mitigated significantly. Salaries and benefits. So a lot of furloughs, a lot of pay cuts, people doing more with less. The team over there has done an extremely great job, in my opinion, taking on more than one job, if you will. Contracted services, the operations in general, repairs and maintenance. You know, we've tried to defer a little bit, but we need to fix what we need to fix so that we can operate. And then operational supplies, same way. Utilities is a big deal. So we really look at utilities on an hourly basis. You will find each of the executive team over there walking the building, turning out lights, and finding out who left the light on. It's as simple as that, you know? So total indirects, you know, you can see there. Once again, the $13 million for first quarter is illustrated there. I'm going to go into it a little bit deeper. All right, next slide. So here's the effect of the cancellations that we just talked about. It's 33 event days. That's $250,000 in estimated revenue. It's 6,650 attendees that did not come to Branson because of COVID. once again. Now, remember, these decisions were made in fourth quarter of 20. So, next slide. Once again, I normally keep this slide in almost every presentation because I want you all to know what we're doing to mitigate expenses. We are very tight as a team to understand that we pretend it's our dollar because we're all taxpayers and it is our dollar. So there's no frivolous spending at all. In fact, there's more creativity in how we spend money. We are still continuing a couple of furloughs and salary reductions just in case. Utilities, we did an audit on our utilities and we found another $30,000 that we can save by reclassifying ourselves within the utility system, which was really good. I renegotiated a lot of the vendor agreements, and of course, we're just focusing on critical needs, not wants. A little bit of the revenue side, right? So the Venue Shield program, which is the safety protocol within our new norm, unfortunately, is progressing into creating more of a confidence level with our clients. So when they see what we're doing to mitigate against possible risk of COVID or other, then they say, okay, I'm more likely to book my piece of business because, hey, it's a safe venue. We're utilizing the marketing fund actively, not passively. I've said this before. And let me tell you what that means. Passively, it means putting an ad out there and hoping that someone will call. Well, those days are gone. You know, where the rubber meets the road is we need a booking. We need people in town. We need the economic impact from the people that are coming in town. So what makes a no or a maybe turn into a yes? It's called incentives and discounts. Like every other city USA, we are competing against room rental being waived, major deep discounts, transportation being underwritten, et cetera, et cetera. And we are now able to use the marketing fund in more creative manner to where we can help underwrite that to get that yes and not a maybe or a no. Good example, Stumo. Stumo was going to go to St. Louis because St. Louis had a little less restrictions than Kansas City. And we were able to grab them by underwriting the room rental. And when you underwrite that room rental, it's a no-brainer. And now we got them for another 2 years. That's a good way to use the marketing fund right there. Now, in the accounting world, unfortunately, that same expenditure, let's call it $50,000, it will go into the revenue side to underwrite room rental, but however, it is also stated in the expense side as a liability. So it offsets to zero. So if you're looking at a performance indicator, you know, you take that out of the expense side because it's not really an expense on a performance indicating accounting situation, but it is in governmental, right? There you go. A little different opinions. But the Alliance, I want to talk about this. This is very important to me. It's very important to the Chamber and the Hilton. We've had a couple of meetings already. I've talked about this to a few of you. We've had the last meeting. We formed a mission statement of how we will work together. We formed the Alliance, which means that we go out and sell together as 3 entities to one. So, good example, I went to Lake Charles, Louisiana, my old stomping grounds, to visit a trade show of meeting planners with the Chamber and the Hilton. And my director of sales, their director of sales, and the executives went out there as a team, and we secured 3 pieces of business. Just because the higher level, instead of a salesperson there, you have the decision makers there. They were very impressed with that, and you know, here we go. You know, it's working. Sponsorship opportunities we already talked about. Next slide, please. Here's the economic impact that we're talking about, Mayor. Your Q1 operational net operating income is a negative $329,878. That's underwriting that operation. The economic impact gross that we've said here is 13 million and some change. So when I net that out, the net is 12,742,000 after your investment. So if we're looking at a stock, this is Amazon stock. When someone said, hey, this Amazon might be a good idea to buy stock back whenever it was starting. This is a 3,000, almost 4,000% return, which is incredible. Now, not all of that is direct cash into your coffers. This is the greater good. Remember, this is the economic impact of all. These are jobs in the community. These are hotel room nights. This is shopping. This is entertainment. People buying tickets because they're in town. Those types of things. Next slide, please. And here's just a detailed breakdown as an example of the economic impact for each event that we've had in first quarter. So attendance-wise, you can see January, 9,000 and some change as far as attendance. February, that's 16,000. No, I'm sorry, 1,600. And then look at March. That's crazy, 16,000 people. So you can see the economic impact for different events here. And look at Lake Country Soccer. I want to point that out to you. That's a men's and women's, or girls and boys, should I say, soccer weekend in 2 different weekends within a very neat time in January in Branson. And, you know, we had almost 4,000 people in each weekend. It was incredible. And of course, Conklin, 1,000 people is actually conservative. It was more in the 1,600 range that showed up. That's $1.4 million of economic impact there. So very positive information. Next slide, please. And once again, you've seen this before. This is how it's calculated. And this is directly from the chamber. You can see the hotel, you know, which is lodging, transportation, recreation, retail, et cetera. And it's all in a method of calculation utilized within the industry. What this does take into consideration are locals attending events. That takes that calculation out. So we're not counting people that are already going that are local. We're counting new money. This is new money with a multiplier effect to create economic impact. Next slide. I believe Jamie had discussed this with you last meeting, and it was in this presentation just because we had submitted this presentation early. But we are in the process of bringing another chiller online to talk about capital expenditures. A little over $10,000 is what it's going to cost us. A logic board went out and a couple of other items. And if you all are trying to buy a new car, you probably know that any microchip or logic boards are really hard to come by right now. So they're on back order. So it is a work in progress. At the moment, the cooling is adequate at the moment because we're running the AC at night, which helps us during half the day the next day. So next slide. So you saw the financials, but you didn't see yet the customer service survey scores. And so I wanted to just kind of touch on that a little bit because this indicates if they're going to come back or not, quite frankly. So out of a 100%, sales and events job knowledge, 91 there, professionalism, 97, courtesy of the entire building staff in general, 96, cleanliness, 94, quality of food and beverage, very high marks there, overall satisfaction. And what I like to really look at is what do you think it's going to be versus what it actually was as far as what your expectation was in satisfaction. Before they stepped foot in the building, they had a 79% confidence rate, I call it, of the convention center. After their event, it was 92. That tells you that we did a good job. And here's just a testimony from Mr. Herbster with Conklin Companies, best convention ever, from the placement of each chair to the delicious meals, stunning desserts, and patriotic visual gift, which was fireworks on the dessert. It was incredible. That was Conklin's VIP reception. Your attention to details truly puts you in a league of your own. So kudos to the team over there at the convention center, and of course the city for supporting the convention center throughout the way. Next slide.
Excuse me, Sam.
Yes, sir.
Back on that testimony from Charles Herbster. Several years ago, several, it wasn't that many years ago, a couple years ago, Charles Herbster flew into Branson to attend a Board of Aldermen meeting as we were discussing, are we going to change management in our convention center? He was less than impressed, would be a politically correct way to say that. He was flat angry. He was threatening to not bring his business back, right? So I want to say publicly, this is a direct reflection on you and your team to get a comment like that from just a few years, and Conklin is our largest convention,
It is one of the largest.
one of the largest of the year we have in Branson. And to have that testimony compared to what we heard just a few years ago, I'm going to say kudos to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, you're absolutely right. Larry was spot on. He gave us a blistering up here a couple years ago. And I was really glad to see that because we thought our decision at that time was going to cost that. And I think that letter sort of disputes that fact now, and he is happy with it. And thank you for what your staff has done.
Thank
So
you.
I think we made the right decision. He just confirmed it.
Absolutely, and I do thank you and want to say publicly that it is all about the team. There is not one person that can do this alone. There was a culture shift, there was a customer service mindset shift, and that occurred, and that's the fruits of the labor right there. So thank you very much for your support.
How is your relationship now with Hilton? Because it was a little rough as it was with Mr. Herfter. Larry and I, Stan, I think the only three were sitting up here at the time listening to that blistering. I'm a poet and don't know it. How's it going?
It's going incredibly well. We've aligned our goals, and we came together with the alliance of the Chamber, the Hilton, and the Convention Center, and said, okay, what's our goal here? Our goal is to elevate everyone, including the city. Let's get the economic impact up, and let's not work in silos. And so that occurred, and it's still occurring. And I'll tell you, I'm so proud of the leadership at the Hilton. Harold, Wendy, and everyone over there has done a fantastic job, as well as the Chamber. I can't say enough good about Jason and his crew, from Tara to Samantha. We all work together now, shoulder to shoulder, and no one is above each other, which is very positive. So, whenever you may ask me, well, who closed that piece of business? We all did. We all did.
This is very encouraging to hear because before the tourism district tax passed, the CVB didn't have any activity down there. We put that funding into that, and we really expected those three to meld with each other. I'm glad to hear that's happening.
Yes, sir, it did, and then some.
In reference to the alliance model that you referred to with the other business partners, are you reaching out digitally? Are you physically going out and grabbing the business as far as your marketing plan with the alliance, or how y'all doing that?
So prior to that, it was advertising, right? And now it's more targeted. It's digital. It's geolocation. It is, we've hired Wisdom, which is a great company to work with. The Chamber has done the same thing. So now we have the ability to say, okay, we even have the ability to listen of the chatter out there about who's discouraged about different competing markets and want to move their convention out of that market. We hear it, and now we know who's saying it.
And you go grab
and we go grab them.
Yeah.
So now it's extremely targeted. That's one aspect. The other is, hey, we do know the meeting planners that will consider Branson. So what is going to turn the no into a yes? Let's all come to the table and look at it. So doing it together is the key. RFP responses together is the key. I think before they were responding separately, and if you know, that's kind of confusing when you're evaluating where to go. In a business's decision, you have 4 RFP responses from the same city. That doesn't make much sense. So what we are also doing is including our partners. including the theaters, you know. It's a destination. It's not about just the building, it's about the destination. What are you gonna do after 5? Because you got a lot more money to spend. I'm gonna turn you upside down and shake you a little bit.
No, I love that, and when I heard you mention it, because we've kind of done the same thing at the theater. We're physically, I mean, we're renting a van, we're grabbing, we got another show, we have a restaurant, the Titanic, and then a hotel, and they're getting in a van, and they're like making cold calls, and they're going to Nebraska and Texas and Oklahoma, and they're stopping in at churches and bank travel clubs, walking and saying, hey, here we are, we got 2 shows and a restaurant and a hotel, and here's a package, and it's been working.
It works because it's face to face.
Yeah.
You know, we're not sending an email. We're not gonna show up with a coffee cup and some cookies. We're gonna say, this is gonna be a great business decision for you at a great destination.
Yeah, and
we're doing it together.
they're impressed that you took the time to drive 300 miles and stop in and say hello, and I'm telling you, it's a great model.
Absolutely. And it's so impressive, like, if you would show up and ask, you know, right, if you'd come off the bus at that group tour operator's office, oh, heck, Clay's here. He must really think that I should be there, right? He took the time out to do it. And that's what I'm talking about. So once we have a mesh team doing that, that's where we became more effective.
Yeah, that's a great plan.
Yeah. Any other questions? Sorry, I went over my time.
Any other questions on the board?
Just impressed, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
It's exceeded my expectations, and I think we made the right decision.
Appreciate it, thank you.
And I agree with that. And I know we've covered it, but the amount of business the convention center brings to all businesses in Branson, it screams. I believe one of your slides said there was estimated 24,775 room nights as a direct result, right?
That's
So,
correct.
Yeah. I just want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
The last one is the project status report, and there's not much activity going on here. Like I say, every time there will be when we start our projects back up. So these are the downtown project and the 76 project. So when we start it back up, we'll start showing you more and more detail of revenues and expenditures if and when we do those. Okay? And then so the last.
Do you have anything here about the 76 project, revitalization?
Yes, the middle piece is the 76, the bottom piece is the 76 water mains, the top piece is the downtown project.
Is this on the website?
It should be, and this one will get posted before too long, sure.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, we're still looking at about $4 million to complete the downtown revitalization, right? The last 2 phases.
Yes, I believe so. I think 2.6 plus 1.5, yeah.
Any board members have any questions? Questions from the audience? Questions from Stan?
No.
Where's the gumbo?
Go ahead, Jerry.
We're going to talk about our upcoming meeting.
Yes, that was the next thing, the director's report. Really quickly, we're trying to set the date for the priority-based budgeting scoring of all the capital requests for our budget process. Tentatively, we've got it for July the 9th. Is anyone available during that time? Do we need to reschedule? For the Finance Committee, what do your calendars look like? Because if you recall, every year we go through that, we'll spend some time, we'll bring some breakfast and spend some time talking about each one of the capital requests, going down through the process, letting you get to know what those capital requests are and prioritizing them.
What time do you have that tentatively scheduled for on the 9th?
We typically do it, we can do it from noon to 4, we can do it from, we say 9 to noon. It really is based upon your schedules. So it'll take, as you all, most of you have experienced, it'll take longer than 2 hours for sure, potentially 3 hours. So if we go to 3 hours, we could do 9 to noon or noon to 3 or whatever, and we'll take care of lunch or breakfast, whichever y'all prefer.
Were you thinking Bill Ribs lunch?
Ribs, hey, Sam's offered gumbo before.
Okay.
Between gumbo and ribs.
Yeah.
Does it matter morning or afternoon? And who does it matter to? Does it matter, I mean, for your schedules? Got any suggestions, Michael?
Well, for me, AM's better because I'm leaving town that afternoon.
AM, okay. Does anybody have a problem with 9 to noon on July the 9th?
I'm going to put a hold on it.
We'll put a hold, okay.
There's a song there somewhere, isn't there?
Can we truly be honest here and say it's really more like 9 to 1?
Well, that is the truth, because we get to talking about the capital request, and then the other directors get to come in and talk about it with you all. So you might want to say the meeting's going to go over, as did today, so.
And I would like to see us spend a little bit more time on that. It's such an important
It is.
tool.
Yes. So we'll say 9 to 1. How about that? And maybe lunch too. Okay. And that's really all I had, just making sure the upcoming budget process and the calendar and the timeline. We'll get y'all out the timeline because I know that we have a special meeting needed for September as well to go down through the budget before the special budget meeting that we do typically at the end of September, 1st of October. So we have several of those timelines coming that we'll send you out and see if y'all are all available at that time.
Thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? Can I get a motion to adjourn from the Board of Aldermen? Motion in second. Is there, let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Now I need a motion to adjourn from the Finance Committee, please.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
A little loud, Stan.
Sorry.
All opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Thank you, everybody.